I just wanna thank everybody for being here today on the other side of the screen. I am incredibly humbled. I am honored. I have been very, very lucky to have been able to read your stories through the eyes of a mother, through the eyes of a father, of a grandkid, of a coworker, of a brother, a sister, a friend, a teacher. Thank you so much for your generosity and allowing us and helping us feel the interconnectedness, the oneness. Um, we understand that death is part of life, but we also, our heart, our soul, our mind yearns to say, I love you, to say, I miss you, to say, I see you later. So thank you for allowing me, for allowing the city, for allowing this group of performers today, simply being a tool, offering a tool in this very difficult year, a tool that could help us grieve together as a community. Thank you. That's all I have. And I hope that you stick around and are moved to share more stories after you experience this.
Our mom migrated to New York City in the year of September 1958. She was from a small town in Bowman, South Carolina, but she loved New York City. She connected with Walker Memorial Baptist Church in the Bronx and was a very active member. She received the highest award that a member of the church could receive. She found her place in the church and was asked to become a deacon. She worked closely with the pastor, praying for the sick, calling the sick, whatever she could do to help the church, she did. She was a fighter. She battled heart disease, beat cancer twice, endured many complications. Every time life knocked her down, she stood up. She stood back up, tall and ready to fight another round. After fighting for a week and a day, she received her last rites from her pastor, and with the assistance of the doctors, Ada Mae Void Rivers was able to hear her two children say their farewells over the phone.
He stayed at home a lot. When our parents were sick, he would give them medication, always taking care of our sister who has autism. He dedicated his life to our sister. She's the youngest. How did he do it? He has the patience. He had a stroke, a mild stroke. He ended up in the hospital, then in rehab. That's when he came down with COVID. Growing up, we rode bikes around Flatbush, and he loved his comic books. He was proud of building his comic book collection. He wanted every single comic book. I have boxes piling up in the ceiling. Probably more than 5,000.
My daughter, my first, oldest daughter. She was outgoing. She was preparing for college. She just turned 21. She was going to turn 22. She was very gorgeous, beautiful. She liked to hang out with her friends, but also work. She had a job since she was 14. She was the older sister. She was a fashionista. She liked to go shopping. She liked to dress other people.
She went by many names. Shy She, Shy Shy, Fly Shy, or just Shy. She was a go-getter. She was dealing with people straight up, and she was still going to work at its peak. We were telling her not to go to work. but she was all consumed with getting herself together. Her intention was to go to nursing school. She was just doing what a motivated 21-year-old would.
His personality was so big. I can't even imagine all the lives he impacted. I'm his oldest. We all lived in Flushing, Queens. He worked at Sutton Terrace for 20 plus years as a porter. In June, it would have been 21 years. Someone in the building got the virus. He wasn't able to beat it, but my dad didn't. He never worried about anything. He never looked at problems as being problems. He was always happy. He was a joker. He was a dancer. He was always finding ways to make us laugh, to always put a smile on our faces. Our house is a funeral now. The sunlight is gone. He was the sun. Life comes and goes. You gotta live day by day, he would say. He also used to say, life is not easy, but you got to enjoy it. He wasn't the best dancer, but he would just dance. And if there were parties, he had to be there.
Above flowers, walls, painting of a unicorn, ancient battles faded, decayed, worn. Gentle soul walked slow, easy, never forlorn, slow walker. Every day, no matter rain or shine, overhead jet engines hum and whine, the slow walker eases by, steady tree and climbing vine, the slow walker. Observing branches melodic swaying, shadowing yoga poses and visionaries praying, silence the only mantra worth saying, slow walker. Resembling starship captains of the next generation, as a park revelers delight in youthful jubilation, ordering Mother Nature to remain at her station, slow walker. Dusk falls eerie, street lamps flicker, glow like weary ghosts, causing wind to blow. Summer, springs, winter falls, your steps flawless flow, slow walker. Now time hurries those meager and late, as if chasing rabbits for some secret rendezvous or atrocious date. Slow walker pays no mind, continue walking. It's a glorious fate, slow walker.
I am really mad about the nursing home. Last I saw her was March 11th, and they shut it down March 13th. She had a birthday in there on March 27th. I talk to her every day. They called me from the nursing home one day and said her blood pressure dropped and they put her on oxygen. They said she signed a do not resuscitate order and didn't want to go to the hospital, but I said, you have to take her to the hospital. And they did. She was there for 2 days and then died. The one thing she loved more than anything was Sudoku. She did this all the time. I can't do it. She used to do her own taxes. She was mathematical. You could give her a phone number and wait till the next day and she would remember it.
He watched Fox. He listened to Trump. He downplayed the virus and died fairly early in the pandemic. My dad didn't have a funeral per se. He was one of the first thousands or so that died in New York during the pandemic. He was buried with only my sister and niece in attendance. My mom and I decided not to go because of risk factors. He also wanted to know how to dance. Before my bar mitzvah in 1974, he started to take dancing lessons on Arthur Murray and Woodhaven Boulevard. This led to a lifetime of dancing and even dance competitions. He was a quiet man, but he loved to dance.
My dad was at a hospital in Queens. He was there for a few days, then they transferred him to another hospital. A year before, he had a kidney transplant. He was doing great. But then he contracted the virus. My mom and all my sisters got sick with the virus too. Everyone got sick except me and one sister. We kept calling the team at the hospital. We never had a virtual visit, but they spoke to us respectfully and thoughtfully. We knew they were going through a lot at the hospital. My father was in good condition. Then all of a sudden, when he got transferred, they failed to tell us the risks. They never said transferring would cause a risk. As soon as he was transferred, his oxygen dropped. We got a call from the palliative care, the senior doctor. They admitted that it was a delayed medical response. They didn't have a Spanish-speaking nurse. They let my mom and my sister go in there to see him. They finally had an interpreter. I want answers. Those 3 weeks, we weren't short of ventilators at that time. They weren't short of space. Why did they have such a delayed medical response? Why didn't they tell us of the risks of transferring him? I'm thankful my parents came here 50 years ago. I speak fluent English. My parents came here legally. They got married here legally. My mom went to school. My dad was a plumber. He gave us the American dream. He gave us everything. I was the last one to see him. He called me crying. I don't know how I'm going to be able to recover. I don't know how I'm going to be able to recover from losing my dad. I don't know. You're muted, Francis.
My dad was among the first MTA workers to die of COVID-19. He was a bus driver in Brooklyn for 15 years. Now when you see a bus driver, they have a mask and gloves. But back then, my dad never got a mask or a single pair of gloves. My dad, he was a straight arrow, an elder at a Kingdom Hall of Jehovah's Witnesses in Brooklyn. He went out, did everything he had to do, then went home to his family.
He loved conversation and was so attuned to his grandchildren. They called him Poppy or Pop-Up. He could talk to you about anything, from religion to ancient history to current events. We didn't know he was sick. But when we couldn't reach him during Easter weekend, we began calling the hospitals, and by the time we managed to talk to him on the iPad, he was on life support. We spent 2 hours reminiscing and saying goodbye.
Extrañas un baño de sol, la palidez de tu rostro y los anillos celestiales de tus ojeras son el panfleto perfecto de esta epidemia. Te asomas a la ventana y tus lánguidos latidos te rebotan en el pecho con la rapidez que el sol retira su falda luminosa de la escalera de escape y flota hacia un aposento en el oeste. Te sientas en el mueble, respiras hondo varias veces, buscando algún namasté que no termina de llegar. Yo escondo mis ganas de arreglarlo todo y te dejo sola, dándole el pésame a tus pensamientos. A los pocos minutos me buscas para decirme que no soportas el agudo sonido de las ambulancias que llenan el silencio de miedos, y muertos de miedo asiento con la cabeza, nos abrazamos en busca de algún silencio, mientras la greca hace gárgaras con el café a punto de ebullición.
Demetrius, you're muted.
All right. Everyone called her Miss Karen and Miss G as a sign of respect. She was the coordinator for City Meals on Wheels at the Mid-Bronx Senior Council. Miss Karen oversaw regular food delivery to hundreds of residents in the Bronx, working long hours, 6 days a week, and every Thanksgiving and other holidays. She gave people opportunities. Oh, yeah. Oh, wow.
Demetrius, you're muted. It's all right. Let's take that back if we can, brother. Thank you.
All right. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. Can we take that back from the beginning?
Yes. So we started from the
Thank you.
beginning.
Thank you.
All right. Everyone called her Miss Karen and Miss G as a sign of respect. She was the coordinator for City Meals on Wheels at the Mid-Bronx Senior Council. Miss Karen oversaw regular food delivery to hundreds of residents in the Bronx, working long hours, 6 days a week, and every Thanksgiving and other holidays. She gave people opportunities who would not normally have: ex-cons and former drug addicts. Miss G was a free spirit and an avid reader.
She used to embarrass us by yelling out the window, "No se vayan muy lejos, niñas!" whenever we wandered too far away while playing outside, and everyone recognized her yelling. She was born in Honduras and immigrated to Florida. She worked as a housekeeper for a few years before moving to New York in 1970, where she worked and took pride in being a home attendant. In the little time she had when she wasn't working, she loved listening to merengue and her two favorite artists, Julio Iglesias y El Puma. We want her to be remembered as a real person who had real feelings and died too young.
For more than 30 years, he woke up at 4 a.m. almost every day to drive a taxi in the Bronx. At our family gatherings, he enjoyed playing with his grandchildren and often shared life lessons that he picked up over the course of his long career behind the wheel. Have a goal, make a plan, he would say.
Before moving to the US from China, my dad sailed around the world, working as a boatswain on a ship to make money and support his family. After deciding life at sea wasn't for him, he moved here and opened a Chinese restaurant in Harlem. He lived in the kitchen and he was like a captain of the ship. Seeing him in charge of his restaurant, it was like his kingdom. Food was a love language to him.
He loved to cook. His specialty was Asian cuisine, spring rolls, noodles, but he'll try anything. He was born in Puebla, Mexico, then moved to Astoria at age 15. He attended high school in Queens and college at Syracuse University. As an adult, he traveled. He spent some time in Florida before returning to Queens. He was an Uber driver at the time he got sick. He knew the city so well, like the back of his hand. He loved driving us all over, wherever we wanted to go.
She had a career as a hairdresser and a tailor, She was also the family matriarch. She was there for me when I delivered my first child. She stayed there through the night to make sure me and the baby were okay. She loved walking on the beach and feeling the sun on her skin. She took pride in her tomato garden and also had a knack for making friends.
When New Yorkers called 911, John Red was one of the voices on the other line. Over the course of 26 years, Red worked as a dispatcher and emergency medical technician for the New York City Fire Department, directing emergency responders and offering first aid instructions to callers. He also aided the rescue and recovery efforts at Ground Zero after the September 11th attacks. Red was a mentor to many, a devoted husband, and an amateur photographer.
Originally, he disliked my cat. But not long after living together, they became best friends. He even made fresh cat food. My father immigrated to Queens from Bangladesh in search of a better life. He worked tirelessly in restaurants and as a taxi driver to accomplish his dream of owning a home in New York and properties in Bangladesh, where he could spend time with his grandchildren and friends. My dad was the type of person who helped everyone all his life.
He was a dishwasher and a member of the event setup team. He often showed up to work with empanadas to share a positive, hard-working attitude. He was a valued employee for 5 years, and he was beloved by all of his co-workers. Miguel was an immigrant from Ecuador. He was kind, a wonderful man. He is already so missed by those who knew him. See, the world could be a much better place if there were more people like Miguel.
Born to Mattie and Mac, he wasn't the only one. With 5 brothers, 2 sisters, they still had a lot of fun. But he said, hey, nephew, it was hard working out in that South Carolina sun. Like my Uncle James said, like my Uncle James said. He came home after fighting in a controversial war and served all the mail to the rich and the poor. But when he retired and he walked out, he said a bunch of stiffs to them all as he walked out that post office door. Like my Uncle James said, he could do the math all in his head. And he even liked to show about Fred. Well, he used to drive his Camaro through Harlem of the past, Lenox Lounge, Teresa Hotel, Small's Paradise, but they wouldn't last. But the Apollo Theater is still there, and he saw James Brown. Ow! And it was a blast. Like my Uncle James said, all those directions he led, and he still liked that show about Fred. Well, politics, sports. He was the master of discussion. He could argue and debate with no need for repercussion, no matter you were Black, white, Greek, Asian, Latino, Irish, Jewish, Catholic, Muslim, Buddhist, or even Russian. Like Uncle James said, it was the math that was all in his head, and he liked that show about Fred. Well, then there came the time for him to take a little rest. No more worries, no more pain, and definitely no more stress, because in spite of all of the calamities, even pandemics and racial and politics, he had passed all of life's tests. Like my Uncle James said, he could do that math all in his head, and we'll remember him like Fred.
Mario BPJ Povega was a true New Yorker, born and raised in Brooklyn. After serving in the Navy in the Korean War, he spent 25 years with the New York City Department of Sanitation on the Upper East Side, retiring as a foreman. He was known as the mayor of the block. He sat on his stoop, surrounded by friends. He talked to everyone and knew everyone's stories. He was Brooklyn at its best, and his chair on the stoop remains immemorial to him. One morning, a taxi crashed into a wall and the driver was outside the car screaming. My dad stopped his truck and ran over. The driver was fine. However, his cab pinned a young woman to the wall, severing her leg. My dad immediately removed his belt and applied a tourniquet while his partner ran to a payphone. The young woman lost her leg, but since then had always kept in touch with my dad, grateful that his actions saved her life. We act first. My dad was a true New Yorker. Hardest part of losing my dad wasn't just losing him. It was the feeling we abandoned him from his ride in the ambulance to his last breath. That's what COVID did.
He was known as the mayor of the neighborhood. He enjoyed spending his free time with his family discussing politics, Haitian and American alike. He volunteered at a fast and friendly pharmacy. He enjoyed talking on his cell phone, going to the local bodega where he was a staple, walking around the neighborhood with his cane, playing his numbers, or just sitting on the front porch. Back in 2016, Joseph became a papa. He met the love of his life, his grandson, Noah. The bond that was shared between the two of them transcends time and space. A love that books are written about, movies are made out, and photographers long to capture. Mi hija, justo antes de dormir, con voz dulce y llena de ternura me dice, papi, creo que vienen los monstruos, tengo miedo. Le digo que respire y piense en nubes de algodones morados y rosas que flotan silbando te quieros. Le digo respira y trata de relajarte. Dales la espalda, son solo toallas que cuelgan de la puerta. Me cercioro de que todos duermen, que la quietud y la oscuridad reinen. Seguido siento el hálito de mis propios miedos. Se difunde una avalancha de horrores sobre mí, no menos tangibles que los de ella. Aquellos consejos tan infalibles se doblegan ante el terror de su presencia. Suena una ambulancia, me aferro a la vida.
She was one of 8 children. She was born in the Dominican Republic and immigrated to the United States in the late 1960s in order to work and provide for her family. She worked in a clothing factory sewing leather jackets, and then she went on to become a home assistant for people with developmental disabilities. She was proud of the fact that she was able to navigate New York City without speaking English. We enjoyed spending time together. We had a routine of going food shopping on Fridays or getting lunch at her favorite Chinese restaurant. She prided herself on her independence and ability to provide for her family. She never failed me. And she never failed to show me that she loved me.
Back when school was in session, we would hear Yareli say, "My dad helped me with this homework," or "My dad explained this part for me," or "I can ask my dad about it when he gets home from work." We saw his devotion firsthand. He was at every parent-teacher conference and school event. He would ask good questions about his daughter's progress and how to help her. When the schools closed, Tigo was in remote learning support for Yareli. Even as he got sick on April 1st, when we scheduled a Zoom dance session with our class, Yareli told us, "My dad is the one who is good at computers and he's sick in bed, so he can't help me get into the class." But he did. The last time we saw Diego, he was fixing her audio video from his sick bed so that Yareli could dance Go Noodle with her classmates. He was hospitalized the following day and he did not come back home. Yareli talks about how he was great at soccer, how he read her bedtime stories in English and Spanish, and how they colored together. "My dad was actually the best dad." And we, her teachers, tell her that he showed. We could tell. He was actually the best dad.
My father immigrated from Cuenca, Ecuador. He then encouraged our family to also come to New York for a better future. His parents, siblings, nieces, and nephews. My father was such a family-oriented man. Our family went everywhere together with my mother and my younger brother. He would always say, "We can go anywhere and do anything as long as the 4 of us are always together." My father was the head of our extended family. He was the one to organize all our family adventures, gatherings, road trips. He also loved to fish. He would say, "En el mar, la vida es más sabrosa." He was extremely proud of owning his own house. Him and my mom loved cleaning the house together, inside and out.
If you were looking for Antonia, you could often find her in her garden. She cared deeply for her flowers, which blossomed beautifully in late April. She was a devoted grandmother who defied her age to be a presence in her family members' lives. Every morning, she made the rounds, calling each of her 5 children to wish them good morning and see that they arrived to work safely. Antonia never failed anyone. She was extremely happy to be able to meet her great-grandchildren. She was the strongest she could be during the last moments, as she always was when she was with us.
New York was my mother's chosen hometown. She grew up in New Jersey and made her career as a social worker in Rochester. After retiring, she decided to live out her dream and be a city girl. She sold her home and moved to Manhattan. She loved everything New York: the museums, the galleries, shows, music, architecture, food. She was a daily consumer of the city's art and culture. My mother was always on the move. She was a member of a gym, played tennis, and was active in many clubs and organizations. If I was lucky to reach her when I called from Wisconsin, Our conversations were typically brief because she was on her way to a concert, a city bike, a historical tour, a lecture, or to catch the latest exhibit at one of the museums. She was extremely generous with her time and her home too, inviting friends and friends of friends. She loved everything New York.
Rosemary lived the majority of her life in Jackson Heights. She was a beloved fixture in the neighborhood. Holidays were her finest hours, when she would redecorate the entire house festively. On Halloween, she would hand out hundreds of prepared bags of Halloween candy, which often meant long lines of trick-or-treaters waiting at the Terio's door. On summer days, Rosemary could be found sitting outside her house on a lawn chair with
Anthony. His company, A&R Trucking, stood for Anthony and Rosemary, the name of the woman he fell in love with at the age of 17, and he would later marry. He was gregarious, familiar face to many in Jackson Heights, and he became known for giving people second chances. When he retired in the late 90s, Anthony took 2 recovering addicts to drive his trucks.
Rosemary could go into a room and she knew how to create a welcoming atmosphere.
Everybody knew Tony when he pulled up. He was everybody's dad.
Thomas survived the Holocaust after he and his mother used false Dutch identification cards to evade the Nazis. He got deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp and survived. He was then drafted into the Soviet army, but he escaped on foot through the Austrian Alps, arriving in Istanbul, where he married his childhood friend,
Edith. Edith Ecker was born in Budapest, Hungary, and fled the Nazis' persecution of the country's Jewish population when she was 7 years old. In 1957, she immigrated to the United States with her husband, settling in Queens, where they raised 3 sons. She was a linguist. She spoke 5 languages, including English. She earned a bachelor's and a master's degree in linguistics from Queens College and taught English as a second language at Queens College for more than 2 decades. She died 9 days after her husband, Thomas.
Pedro Muniz met his wife, Carmen Herida, at a party 1 week after he moved to Washington Heights from Puerto Rico in 1952. He started working as a busboy, worked his way up through the dining industry to manage the restaurant in Statler Hilton, now the Hotel Pennsylvania. Later, he bought the diner, which he ran while raising 3 daughters. He loved to cook while listening to boleros on Saturday and Sunday mornings.
With Carmen Nereida. Carmen Nereida came to New York City in 1949 and settled in Washington Heights. She lived with her siblings and worked as a seamstress in a factory. She met Pedro at a party and they got married in 1953. They were inseparable. After my mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, my dad never left her side. Her cause of death is listed as COVID-19, but I truly believe that even though she had Alzheimer's, she knew my father was gone and chose not to live anymore. She stopped eating and drinking. My mother had a very strong personality and feistiness too. She made sure she left this earth on her terms. In life, she stoically took on some of the most difficult times in her life with force and determination. She would do whatever she needed to take care of her family. I credit her my strength. She died 4 days after he passed.
Randip Bobby Minhas and his wife Simi met when he was 21 and she was 19. He was especially supportive of his wife's career every step of the way. He began running a high fever after a visit to a grocery store. And after 28 days on a ventilator, Randip's oxygen level plummeted And just before he died, he asked his wife on FaceTime to stay a little longer. He died at age 49. I am holding on to his ashes, and I plan to bury them in our backyard and plant a tree. I'm not ready yet to give up his last memory.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this artistic expression that was inspired by all of your stories and interviews, memories and thoughts of your loved ones. Thank you so much for being here today. And I hope that you are moved to continue to share these stories with us. I want to thank the actors for using their instrument today, and the poets and the musicians to allow us to connect in this way. It's been really moving to see all of your messages on the chat. Thank you so much for sharing.